And Gal, we're live. Welcome to the show.
Pleasure being here, Bert.
It's a pleasure having you. Well, let's get started with your journey. I mean, from Israel to New York. Let's go over how you got here today.
Yeah, for sure. So born and raised in Israel. My background, coming out of high school, was more in military and government, so kind of more the political realm. Went to grad school in the UK, and then moved to New York a couple of years ago to do different things, primarily around tech and science. Today, primarily focusing on the investment hat and kind of more deep tech companies.
Yeah. Tell me about the kind of companies that you work with at like First Spark Ventures, and what do you think are some opportunities maybe for founders that are looking in at deep tech and they're thinking, you mentioned military tech, a lot of like these very important things. There are a lot of young founders who are paying attention to a lot of like AI and SaaS, but they're not really aware of how they could contribute maybe to that end of things. So maybe like how could they also follow in the path of those portfolio companies and become deep tech founders? How could they find the way to enter?
Yeah. So maybe taking a step back and kind of playing through a bit of the definitions, what kind of separates a tech company from a deep tech company, what separates um, a deep tech fund from a more general tech fund. Um, one framework I like using is just like where the risk is. In most of tech companies, the risk is primarily around the market, so whether people will actually want to use it. Um, I would say that in deep tech companies, the main risk is around the product and the tech and the engineering as to whether one can build it. So Uber, great tech company, there isn't really a question whether one can build it. It's more a question of whether one can scale it and whether users will want it, etc. Same goes for Snapchat and Facebook and Airbnb and all great tech companies, but the kind of more deep technical component wasn't there at the beginning. Maybe today at scale, they have all those engineering challenges they have to figure out, but those started out as primarily tech companies. In a deep tech company, the main kind of risk, the main unknown that one needs to diligence as a funder or diligence as a potential entrepreneur is the question of the science of the tech, what is needed in order to get it built. So we're focusing on companies that it's unclear whether you can build it. You need to kind of be very smart, very much a domain expert to figure out all the IP, all the engineering, all the science. Uh, but therefore, we look for companies that if it actually gets built, the market is there and is obviously enormous, and the improvement for the customer will be significant. So that's kind of one framework. The way we structure the fund to make it more powerful and to make it more differentiated from other vehicles and other funders out there is that we established it in partnership with a big research institute, primarily funded by the US government, called SRI, the Stanford Research Institute. It's one of these great research establishments set up after World War II, and they've been consistently good in commercializing the sciences. So taking a scientific idea and building a product or a company around it, going all the way back to the ultrasound and the internet, to more recently things like Siri for your iPhone and stuff like that that came out of the institute. So really, how we're structured as a fund is the institute is part of the partnership, and the 1,300 researchers there help us in diligencing the team, the tech, the science.
Absolutely. I want to ask you about. I know you've lived in Israel many years. Now you're living in the United States. If you're a deep tech founder, you're somebody who's interested in building stuff around cybersecurity and military tech, where would you position yourself? I've had friends who, say they want to build defense companies and they think being a place like Tel Aviv is way more advantageous than being a place like California or New York or anywhere in the US. What would your take be on that? Where would you position yourself?
Yeah, so first I will draw the distinction. You can have great deep tech companies that are not dual use, they're not defense oriented. So um, a lot of defense has a dual use component. A lot of defense is actual deep tech, hard tech, etc. So I would say it really depends on the niche you're in. It's like Cambridge, Boston is great for more biotech stuff. The Bay Area is the best for AI. South California, very good for hardware, et cetera, et cetera. So in Israel, there are definitely a few things going for it in terms of cybersecurity, some components of AI, things that have to do with the aerospace and aerial, like from drones to missiles and stuff like that. So I would say it depends on the niche you're in. That's one. Second, I think it also depends on kind of where you're from, where you have more social capital, more local knowledge. Um, so the way I think about it, you always want to be in a place in which um, this place is the best in the world in something, and you're playing on this field in the place that is the best in the world, right? So if Boston is the best for biotech, and you're building a biotech company, you probably want to be there and not in North Carolina, right? That is also very good academic centers and stuff like that. They're just not as good in biotech, and so forth. And so I would index on where do you have the most kind of relationships, capital, local knowledge, and this place is the best in the world, not in an abstract sense, but in a specific domain.
What if you're super young? Like, let's say you're in your late teens, early 20s. You're like a Palmer Lucky type. You
Yeah,
want to build some physical, some hardware, some whether it's in defense or not. And you're thinking, where do I position myself? And you can virtually build anywhere, right? You could go to, Boston area. You could go to New York. You could go to Tel Aviv. You could virtually build up your social capital anywhere in the world. What
yeah,
city do you think? I know it's highly contextual depending on technology, but let's say just hardware in general. You're really interested in building something like Oculus, a company like that. Where
yeah,
are you thinking in terms, strategically in terms of going to?
yeah. I would still say California is the best place in the world for like young, ambitious talent that wants to build products. There are other places to be if you're ambitious on other domains, but if you're a product guy, you're a tech guy, you're an engineer, and you want to build stuff, it still has like very conducive culture, both in terms of uh, the kind of social acceptability, obviously the better funding, um, and just like getting people around you to raise your aspirations. It seems like Austin is also has a lot of that kind of going for it today. Um, Israel does as well. Again, in some areas more so than others. Um, but yeah, somehow California, the north for software, the south for hardware, is still the best place in the world for it, and the U.S. the best country in the world for it.
You mentioned Austin. I know Joe Lonsdale's AVC is based out of Austin, and they've also been doing a lot of investing in deep tech. And it seems to be like a trend, really, where there are an increasing number of venture capital funds focused specifically on hardware deep tech founders and supporting them and funding them. If you're a young founder today and you're looking at fundraising, you've done some research, you've got some that might work, some that you could commercialize. How would you go about fundraising? What fundraising advice would you have for specifically engaging with venture capitalists and investors in for these specific industries?
Yeah, so I think people tend to over-index on fundraising. Well, if you have like a great idea and a great product, usually it's the funders will actually chase you. So really, the best way to get fundraising going is to become a domain expert and have a real insight, right? And be kind of very obsessive about the problem and the insight, product, sector you're in. And then fundraising, I think funders sometimes forget just because of the dynamics is that the VCs want the best funders more so that the funders want the best VC to some extent, right? That's like their business. So it's really going to the place in which the industry you're after, you're looking to disrupt, etc., is very established, is very strong. So you have the best people in the world in this industry in that cluster. obsessing about the problem, the product, the pain point that you're trying to solve, and talking to as many people as you can, kind of building a personal moat around that, and funding usually follows.
You mentioned recruiting and having the best people around you to be be a company that basically VCs covet, and they want to fund. Like, you become the thing that attracts them. Now, I'm sure when you're doing portfolio management, you're talking to portfolio companies. A lot of them need advice on recruiting. A lot of them need advice on how to recruit A players, and often, especially for first time founders, it's a challenge. They
Yeah.
don't really know how to filter through people. They don't know how to find like world class talent or convince them to join them. How would you go about recruiting, this amazing talent, like A plus talent, to join your team?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's probably a bigger challenge for a founder than raising money. Like making sure that your first 10, 20, 30 hires are like exceptional, smarter than you, very motivated. Um, there are different ways to break it down. Like how do you attract good people to work with you? How do you become a domain expert? How do you become somewhat known in your niche for being this crazy person going after this big problem? Um, so you can break it down, but I think it at the end it comes down to being really obsessive about what you're going after.
And showing that obsessiveness to an extent to the folks you're talking to, and do you think
If
that
you're
that
obsessive, you
attracts
can't really hide it. If you're really, really passionate and really, really obsessive about building some missile defense system or building some biomanufacturing facility or building some new type of battery that will be good for energy transition and stuff like that, and that's what you read, that's what you talk, every conversation you have, you bring it up, uh, you naturally become much smarter than everyone else after doing that for 6, 12, 18 months on the specific niche. People that are also interested start talking about you, start mentioning you. Um, you're going after solving the problem relentlessly because you have no plan B, right? And then like that's essentially how you create momentum. That's how you create a movement. That's how you get smart people to work for you. That's how you get funders to want to fund you. So like this element of relentless focus and some obsessive is usually kind of negative connotation, but that kind of that is probably for me the number one thing you look for um, in a person doing anything in the world, not just tech funders.
How do you find what you're obsessed about when you talk to a lot of portfolio companies? How have those founders maybe found their obsessions and the things that they're deeply passionate about? Or how could somebody young today who doesn't maybe know themselves as well, or who's kind of all over the place, how could they find some that they're really, really obsessed about?
Yeah, so I'm not sure there's a good answer for that because it's almost by definition needs to be very personal, right? There's something about exploring, listening to yourself, being kind of doing your own thing, being unique, right? Um, but I don't think you can teach someone to be obsessive. I don't think you can mentor someone towards like being relentless about a problem, right? It needs to be not innate in some biological sense, but it needs to come from the person. Their discovery processes are very personal. It depends on your uh, upbringing, background, and kind of path in life, and the culture you're from, etc. Um, but if there is one kind of commonality, there needs to be some quirkiness to you, right? That you're not afraid to explore different like weird hobbies or um, intellectual pursuits or adventures, and that through that you learn things and you have like this ambition to figure things out in some deeper way.
What are some maybe opportunities that excite you right now in deep tech? What are some maybe trends you're paying attention to, things you're paying attention that are personally exciting you that maybe you're personally obsessed about to an extent?
Yeah, so the way I think about it, and there are obviously a bunch, but the way I think about it, the two big trends for the next like 10 years, it's around tech and trade, right, and how they kind of correspond to one another. So tech is primarily around AI and how it permeates into the physical world, into genes and atoms, um, and kind of the broader physical world. And trade is everything that has to do with the rebalancing of trade, of global trade. Rebalancing is one way of putting it, or realignment is another. So if we had like a 40-year cycle of making trade more global and offshoring and moving manufacturing and production to other countries, primarily China. Now we're seeing the reverse since COVID. Since COVID, the war in Ukraine, the escalating trade war with China and other kind of and their allies. Now, somewhat with everything happening in the Middle East and the Red Sea, and so the oceans are not safe anymore to move so many goods around for a low cost way. So we're going to see a lot of that coming back to different regional blocks. So this interplay of trade and tech, of AI and China, I think that's a big trend for the next 10, 20 years. There are different ways to go about what to look for there as a funder or a founder. Um, but I would say it does go back to this interplay of politics and tech, right? That if you're building this new plant that you offshored 40 years ago and you onshore it now for some electrical assembly component, for some mineral extraction, etc., you're not going to build the plant the same way it was built 40 years ago when you had it um, in the US. You're going to build it with new technologies, ideally more automated, smarter, etc. On the one hand, on the other hand, the numbers probably don't work out without having some sort of government um, incentives, subsidies, tax breaks, different tariff and trade policies, etc. So I think this interplay is one area in which I see a lot of great companies being built, a lot of fortunes being made. The other is everything that has to do with, we talked about kind of AI permeating the physical world. So AI permeating kind of bio, so genes and the human body, etc. Um, I think we're likely a few years away from having the equivalent of a Chat GDP moment for uh, tech bio, so AI plus bio.
What are some other ways that so you talked about AI permeating into literally like the physical world of atoms, and at some point we can interface with ChatGPT through maybe just our brain, like what Elon Musk says, where we could even have nonverbal, just like without talking, just so like telepathy. What are some other ways, for example, do you see AI that could be applied to the world of atoms that's maybe not being applied today? And what are some things maybe builders can think about, like, oh, that's a frontier I didn't think about that could be used?
Yeah, yeah. Um, so, I mean, the founders are a lot smarter than investors in terms of having local insights versus some kind of macro insights, right? Areas in which robots, humanoids can be extremely uh, cost effective and make a lot of sense is a bunch of areas in which the the types of activities are kind of automated by nature. So think of the Amazon warehouse or the car manufacturing floor, right? Assembly floor. Um, so I imagine for a bunch of things in extraction industries, obviously manufacturing and production for from smelting to electrical assembly, all those things that we haven't been doing in the West, in the US, and in Europe and in the UK for like 40, 50 years now because it was so much cheaper to do it in China and tariffs were low and the oceans were safe. So why not just do it there and just bring it home? All those things, we'll now build them in the US. And um, we don't have the labor, we don't have the people, we don't have the demographic growth, and the people will. we do have in the West, it's not the types of jobs that they're interested in doing, and also those jobs actually require a lot of training. So those that still have the skills are kind of retirement age and stuff like that, and there's not a lot of people coming in. So I would kind of my metric will be like, are we now bringing it back from China because it's critical and we can trust the other countries to be doing it for us? Is it highly it requires very specialized skills that are hard to train for, and we don't have a lot of people for that? Is it repetitive in nature to some extent so that automation can make sense? Humanoids presumably can do very sophisticated automation, right? In terms of I think electricity and everything that has to do with that, servicing, assembly, infrastructure, is a big area to look at for that. Um, some areas in biopharmaceutical and biomanufacturing, biotesting, right? That we saw during COVID. We kind of don't want to trust other countries to be doing it for us. So those are like the two niches that come to mind. Each one is huge, obviously, but then it can also have a bunch of consumer elements from kind of the barista and stuff like that.
Absolutely. I want to ask you about the go-to-market side of things. So, go-to-market for a lot of deep tech and even defense tech companies traditionally has been quite difficult. Like, SpaceX and Palantir a few decades ago, they had to sue their way into getting contracts with the U.S.
Yeah.
government, and since then, there's always been a bit of friction. How do you see the go-to-market strategy evolving now for a lot of these hardware companies, a lot of defense tech companies? How can they break into these worlds? What are some strategies you're seeing that's working right now? And maybe if there's like a playbook, what would that very briefly be for a founder that they could follow?
Yeah, so I think if there is like a common failure mode within more technical scientific founders is that they don't think of the customer. And at the end, the business is a simple thing in the sense that at the end, some other human being is supposed to use the product and it should make their life better somehow, right? And if sometimes you have uh, engineers, technologists that are kind of obsessing about the tech, but then it's like at the end, someone needs to be enjoying the product and be willing to pay for it an amount that kind of makes sense. And it really comes down to that. Um, so the way I think about it, you always start with the end in mind, right? You don't have to start it too early. It's fine to have some period of exploring how the product exactly can be shaped. But at the end, on core metrics that actually matter for people, people can be individuals, can be companies, whatever, it can be governments, right? But at the end, there's a person making the decision and a person using it in some capacity, right? It needs to make some sense in terms of cost reduction, in terms of reliability, performance improvement, etc. And those improvements need to be established with the customer. It's kind of almost obvious to say, but it's many times not done. So kind of starting your entire process with the end in mind. You don't have the privilege in hard tech that you have in software to A/B test consistently and all the time get customer feedback on a mass scale. But having this mindset around customer obsession uh, in deep tech is probably a bit underrated.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about like co-founders for a second. This is going to be my last question for you. But, you mentioned a lot of scientific founders, a lot of real technical ones. They're usually obsessed with tech, but
Yeah.
they don't really even have much of an appetite to really care about the user experience or the customer, go to market, or some of these other things. And so a lot of companies, like for example, Palantir, they had obviously Alex Karp, who's brilliant and he's a technical genius, but then they also had folks like Peter Thiel, who understand economics a little bit more, understands go to market and users and customers a little bit more. I want to ask you about, if you're a deep tech founder today, how would you do you think it's wise to go get a co-founder? And two is like, how would you find a co-founder? How would you find someone that you could trust that could maybe handle some of the more business and sales end of it for you?
Yeah, I mean, the paradox is you want someone that is similar enough in terms of value, orientation, areas of interest, alignment, etc., but you want them to be somewhat different, so you complement each other, right? And that's a balance, like with a marriage, like with other very intense pursuits of groups of people. Um, so ideally, it's a person that you've been through a lot of things together, even if it's a short amount of time, right? So it's not about being a childhood friend if all you did together over the years was just like vacation, right? But if you had some more intense emotional, business, military experiences together, so you kind of know each other beyond the layers of business interactions or vacations and stuff like that, I think that's usually a good start. Um, I think having a clear sense of what you are and what you aren't, uh, it's always a good thing, primarily in the context of a partnership. Sometimes you have tech people that think they're great in sales, and vice versa, salespeople that think they're great in tech. So, kind of seeing that the founders know their own limitations, um, giving the kind of room for the other founder to be what they are, the product guy, the strategy guy, the financing guy, etc. And you can kind of tell that in a conversation if you have a proper sit down with the co-founders together.
All right, there we go. Yeah, those are it for the questions I've got. Is there anything you'd like to add or talk about?
No, congrats on launching this podcast, and had a great time. Thank you for having me.